Chapter 554, Battle with the Lord of Flood Dragon. This chapter is updated by Novels.pl. How did the level of cultivation of this human boy become so powerful? To resist Zhang Yuochen's sword Qi, Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King wielded the roaring flame hammer 12 times. However, not only did it fail to block Zhang Yuochen's sword Qi, but it was also pushed back by 12 steps. At this moment, its arm was tingling with pain, and the roaring flame hammer in its hands kept shaking. Even if Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King were unscathed by such great power, it would not be able to match Zhang Yuochen's skills, even at his prime. It was not difficult for Zhang Yuochen to defeat Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King because they were fighting at the bottom of the sea, where Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King's strength was suppressed to its lowest level. Zhang Yuochen made a tremendous jump to the next realm by breaking through to the Fish Dragon realm, so his level of cultivation had increased by leaps and bounds. In comparison, the Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King was no match with Zhang Yuochen. Swoosh! Taking advantage of this fact, Zhang Yuochen executed space moving and teleported himself to appear above Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King. Holding his sword with both hands, he struck out a long ray of sword light. Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King refused to give in and continued its attack by wielding the roaring flame hammer. Boom! A powerful shockwave reverberated from between the ancient abyss sword and the roaring flame hammer. The Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King took another few steps back before lifting up the roaring flame hammer so it could have a look. What it saw was a white crack on the hammer's surface. It is common knowledge that the roaring flame hammer is a holy weapon. The fact that a human boy's sword made a crack in the holy weapon was incredible. Zhang Yuochen's sword must have been an excellent weapon of the divine troops. Not even the dragon scales on Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King's body could protect him if that sword struck him. If we were on the surface of the earth, it would only take me one breath to blow you to ashes, the Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King said coldly. Well, unfortunately, we are not on the surface of the earth right now, Zhang Yuochen responded. Boom! Suddenly, the cyan fire Xuanwu's body started shaking violently. Both Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King and Zhang Yuochen lost their balance and started swaying. What was going on? As Zhang Yuochen turned to look at King Jinhuang, he realized that King Jinhuang's hands were grasping the top of the iron pillar and was slowly lifting it up. It was not the cyan fire Xuanwu that was shaking, but the iron pillar that penetrated Xuanwu's body. This was not good. King Jinhuang was about to seize the iron pillar and make it his war weapon. If he succeeds, he will become even stronger. By then no one would be able to defeat him. I am your opponent, human boy. When Zhang Yuochen turned to look at King Jinhuang, Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King grabbed the opportunity to strike with the roaring flame hammer to hit Zhang Yuochen's head. Zhang Yuochen realized how dangerous it was, so he quickly mobilized space power and performed space moving to teleport himself behind Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King. Swift swordsmanship. With a flash of sword radiance, the ancient abyss sword, carrying with it the power of time, hacked down Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King's head. Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King's heart almost jumped out as it did not expect Zhang Yuochen to wield his sword with such speed. It instantly dodged to the left with the typical posture of a flood dragon. When it realized that it was not injured, it was able to calm down and regain composure. Then Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King said, "The speed of your sword technique was indeed very fast. Unfortunately, you lack accuracy." Zhang Yuochen replied saying, "Is that so?" Swoosh! All of a sudden, a breach appeared on the crown of Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King's head. Crimson blood gushed out of the breach. The wave of the sword had cut off Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King's fleshy crown. The crown was only coming off now because the sword moved too fast. A flood dragon's fleshy crown, also known as red crown mushroom, condenses all of the flood dragon's spirit and wisdom. Once damaged, it will lose a massive amount of principal chi. How dare you, you human boy! Ah! Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King became hysterical and cried out in agony. Pieces of scarlet scales grew from within its skin. Its body continued to expand, palms spread open to turn into claws and legs turned into a dragon tail. Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King transformed into an enormous red dragon. Bang! Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King sprang upwards and dragged along the cyan fire Xuanwu as it slowly rose to the top. Although Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King was furious because its fleshy crown had been severed, it was wise enough to be aware of its disadvantage in confronting Zhang Yuochen from the bottom of the sea. After all, it was Lord of the Flood Dragons. It can only exert its full power and kill Zhang Yuochen if it returned to the surface of the sea. Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King is a 6th level savage beast. After transforming to its true form, Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King's physical strength increased tremendously, so much so that it was able to drag the body of Cyan Fire Xuanwu. At the same time, the Iron Pillar flew upwards under the command of King Jinhuang. When Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King's power and King Jinhuang's came together, they quickly rose towards the surface and arrived at the midsection of the bloody trench. This won't do. I have to kill Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King as soon as possible. If we were to return to the surface of the sea, I would be compromised. Zhang Yuochen took off on his feet and started skipping. He gathered his powers and struck his combat sword towards the neck of Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King. Poof! With one stroke, the ancient abyss sword cut through the top layer of scales on Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King's neck. The dragon's skin split open and left a bleeding wound. Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King was physically very strong, so even the ancient abyss sword would be unable to sever its head with one stroke. Just as Zhang Yuochen was about to wield the second stroke, a breath of gold inferno was blown by Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King, condensing into a giant pillar of fire directed towards Zhang Yuochen. Gold Inferno is a superior level beast fire. Only 6th level savage beasts that have absorbed huge amounts of metal and fire nature can condense the natures and form this fire. Since the pressure of water has decreased dramatically, Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King was finally able to wield the Gold Inferno. If they continue to move towards shallow waters, the Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King would be able to summon more powerful attacks. Zhang Yuochen did not dare touch the Gold Inferno, so he shrank the space domain into a circle 3 meter in diameter and wrapped it around him. While the coverage of the space domain shrunk, the power of the space domain increased immensely. With the protection of the space domain, Zhang Yuochen passed through the Gold Inferno and was able to wield his sword and struck the neck of Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King once again. Poof! A deep cut appeared on Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King's neck, and blood gushed out from within its skin like a red waterfall. Just one more strike from the sword is enough to cut off Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King's head. When Zhang Yuochen was about to strike for the 3rd time, the power on Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King increased dramatically. A layer of crimson holy light poured out of Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King and wrapped around its body. Boom! A loud noise resounded. The layer of holy light was able to block the ancient abyss sword from striking Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King's neck. The holy light tremored, creating ripples. Roar! Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King stretched out his claws and pressed them down on Zhang Yuochen's head. At this point, Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King had brought Cyan Fire Xuanwu's body towards the sea surface until they were less than 10,000 meters away from the sea surface. A cloud of Gold Inferno wrapped around the claws, forming a fire cloud. Before the dragon's claw struck Zhang Yuochen, a strong gust of wind came from different directions and circled Zhang Yuochen's body. The suppressive force was so intense that Zhang Yuochen could not even move a limb. Swoosh! Zhang Yuochen performed the space-moving technique to move past the claws. He landed on top of Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King's head, then tapped on Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King's forehead with his finger. Space collapse. A massive force from within the space exploded and surged towards Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King. Where the space power progressed, gaps started to appear, forming a network of cracks that kept spreading. The cracks exposed a dark, chaotic void. Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King immediately mobilized Holy Chi to form a 7-layer defense light and pushed it forward to block Zhang Yuochen's power of space. A series of crackles sounded. As space collapsed, the 7-layer defense light disintegrated above Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King. Bang! Bang! As space fell apart and disintegrated, Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King's head started breaking. There was a network of bloody cracks all over. At the same time, the battle have moved to shallow waters. Roar! Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King's powers were elevated to the next level. Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King gave a deafening roar and threw a punch with its claws, producing fierce flames that struck Zhang Yuochen. The blow sent Zhang Yuochen flying 33 meters back. He landed with a thud against a bone wall. The collapsed space restored its calm when it broke free from Zhang Yuochen's control. Zhang Yuochen got up from the ground and spat out a mouthful of blood. He muttered. Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King was already wounded by King Jinhuang and even had its fleshy crown cut off. Also, its neck was almost chopped off by the ancient Abyss sword. Despite all of that, once we returned to shallower seas, it was able to restore and manifest unparalleled strength. Can a fish dragon realm monk ever match up to a half-saint? Would it even be possible for a fatally injured half-saint to easily defeat a superior of the fish dragon realm? Earlier, when the space collapsed, Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King's head was fractured, and even parts of its skull and teeth were exposed. However, Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King continued to survive with the support of the Holy Chi. The power emanating from Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King was like a towering mountain, which was something people could only admire from afar. Every time he moves his claws, it manifests an earth-shattering power. Woo! Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King let out a breath that instantly condensed into thousands of wind blades. They gathered to form a huge torrent of wind blades that made noisy clanking sounds. The wind blades were all flying towards Zhang Yuochen. The breath of a half-saint could be more terrifying than a violent storm. Swish swish. Zhang Yuochen quickly wielded his sword, and countless streams of sword chi started to intertwine together, forming a tight sword net in front of him. Bang! In an instant, the torrent of wind blades shattered the sword net and flew directly to Zhang Yuochen. Zhang Yuochen was thrown back from the impact. Under the impact of the wind blade torrent, Zhang Yuochen flew out of the body of Cyan Fire Xuanwu and landed on the sea surface. Zhang Yuochen's body was immediately covered with dozens of bloody wounds. One of the injuries was so deep it had cut through two of his ribs and almost injured his internal organs. Back on the surface of the sea, the sun was so bright that he could barely open his eyes. Boom! In the distance, King Jinhuang pulled out the iron pillar that penetrated the body of Cyan Fire Xuanwu and flew to the clouds. Black death chi was flowing from his body condensed into a cloud. At that moment, King Jinhuang looked like a statue of the Demon Lord. He carried the iron pillar on his shoulder and looked down at Zhang Yuochen. Grinning, he said, "Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King, I am handing Zhang Yuochen over to you. When you have killed him, remember to bring the body of Cyan Fire Xuanwu back to Huanghe Island for me." When King Jinhuang had finished speaking, he rode on a dark cloud and left. King Jinhuang, leave the Xuanwu holy source behind. Zhang Yuochen was about to catch up when suddenly, a deafening roar sounded. The Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King flew out from the left eye socket of the Cyan Fire Xuanwu and was suspended mid-air. Struggling frantically, he fully transformed to his true form. He resembled a crimson mountain ridge suspended in midair, and he was blocking Zhang Yuochen's way. Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King stared at Zhang Yuochen below and said, "Human boy, on the sea surface, you are a mere ant to me. All I need to do is let out one breath, and you will turn into a bloody fog." Zhang Yuochen could only watch as King Jinhuang disappeared into the horizon. Zhang Yuochen clenched his fists in helplessness, stared at Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King and said, "Is that it? It seems that I have to unlock the second level seal of Sarira to get a hold of the Xuanwu holy source. It's no use. You will die trying if you try to resist." Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King swung its huge tail, hoping to smack it on Zhang Yuochen, believing that it would kill him. However, the moment the tail reached Zhang Yuochen, he caught it with one hand. This can't be. Black Skeleton Flood Dragon King was shocked. He looked towards Zhang Yuochen and saw streaks of faint Buddha's light emitting from his body.